Hello and welcome to CMQs, the Scottish Sun's politics show. My name's Conor, Matchett, the political editor at the paper, and with me, as always, well, at least unless we have a politician on, is Associate Editor of Politics, Chris Musson. Chris, welcome. How are you?
I'm not too bad, just recovering from conference, but I wasn't there for the duration. You were?
I was indeed. It was a long week in Liverpool, mostly because of the boozing, so I can't really complain. But we're going to kick off by bringing you fully up to speed. It was where thousands of delegates descended on Merseyside to welcome Sir Keir Starmer as the first Labour Prime Minister for 14 years. But it should have been a moment of celebration, a moment of great delight, a return to Downing Street in Westminster, but instead overshadowed by rows over winter fuel payment cuts and thousands of pounds of freebies to Sir Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner. Tell us a little bit more about what that row was, rumbling on in the week running up to conference.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was kind of bookended by the rows over freebies and winter fuel payments, which came to a head at the end. But yeah, the freebies row. So this is all about Labour politicians getting free stuff, as it sounds. And the problem with this is, these are the guys who were meant to be doing things differently. And this just kind of looks like, they made such a great big virtue of that in the years before the election, how they would be different. Mm. And even though this is within the rules and all the stuff that they've done, they say is within the rules, it just doesn't look good, does it? It's kind of like they're taking free stuff and they're troughing, essentially, right? And people think, hang on, they're just like the other guys. And then the other big problem is, of course, this is coming at a time when they're cutting people's winter fuel payments, particularly, and saying, everybody's got to, work hard to turn around the country. And at the same time, they're getting all this free stuff. So, on two levels there in particular, this is particularly damaging for them.
Particularly bad, isn't it? When, we obviously, you watched Sir Keir Starmer over 2021, really, up to the election, make a virtue, a very clear and obvious virtue of the fact that he is better than the Conservatives in that sort. You had Boris Johnson and Partygate, you had Rishi Sunak and Sleaze, you had Liz Truss as well with all of chaos there. And they made a massive virtue of, we will clean up politics. We are going to hold ourselves to higher standards because that's what politics was all about. And that lasted 80 days.
Absolutely. And this is manna from heaven for the SNP, for the Tories down south, for all of Labour's critics, because it's not taking much for them to sort of instill this buyer's remorse in a lot of the public, which is, sort of been shining through in the polls in recent weeks with leadership ratings for Starmer, example, falling. So it was no way to be going into their first conference, which should have really been all about celebrating and looking forward and hope. And, everything seemed a little bit apologetic at times. Yeah. And this sort of forced explanation for why things will be difficult at the same time as all this stuff is rumbling on about them getting free stuff. So.
Absolutely. I mean, it might not have been smooth for the UK leadership, but it was much more positive for Anas Sarwar, although he did get his own little freebie with a trip to Anfield on Saturday as well.
That's right. Scottish salmon, paid for him, something a bit fishy.
Right. You've been waiting to use that, haven't you?
They had a trip to Anfield to watch Liverpool against Bournemouth as well. It was barely worth it. But
as a Manchester United fan, it's never worth it, but that's just me.
So there was a bit of that. The Times broke that story on Monday, which caused a little bit of discomfort for Anas. But he was, all in all, he had a good time at conference, I think.
Should we have a look at an example of his good time? I'm just going to run a clip of him at Students' Night Disco, which is a classic event at the back end of conference. So there you go, Uptown Funk.
Well, you were there, Conor. That video was taken by Conor, right? And Labour didn't really want Hacks to be there, and Conor and another couple sneaked in essentially on the last night, and obviously got the phones out when the promised DJ set came out. I mean, it all looked pretty excruciating. Give us Give us your kind of most vivid description of how it was.
I think the best thing I could possibly say about it is that Anas Sarwar lived up to the idea of being a safe, uncontroversial set of hands. You know, very easy hits, TLC, no scrubs, and Where's the Love by Black Eyed Peas was in there as well. One staffer said to me beforehand that they had to make sure that the set list wasn't full of people that had been cancelled in recent years because it was all 90s hip hop. And then there was lots of dad dancing from Anas, you know, kind of like that. I mean, it's something I'm very proud of being able to do.
I don't think people really appreciate quite, you know, the efforts that Conor went to at this conference. He was hanging out, as you can see, with some of the least cool people in the country.
I think so
you didn't have to.
The most deeply cringeworthy about this story is that all of this happened before 11 p.m. Emily Thornberry gyrating as well with Anas.
But he was providing a kind of energy to the conference, Anas, wasn't he? I mean, say what you want about him, he bounces around everywhere and he provides this energy, and people kind of like him. And, you know, I don't want to sound too shallow, but this likability factor is a massive thing in politics, and it will be when we come into the run up to the 2026 election, when we've got Anas Sarwar against John Swinney. He's really trading on this, isn't he, Conor?
Absolutely, and there's a big contrast, I think, between Anas Sarwar and Sir Keir Starmer at this conference. You've got Anas and Scottish Labour seeming like the only part of the party that realises that it won an election in July, and he's going to. Part of Scottish Labour's plans over the next few years is, you know, in the run up to the 2026 Holyrood election, is to like hammer home that hope and change message to Scots, so that they can present a positive vision going into that election. So Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, I mean, Rachel Reeves' forced smile throughout her speech on Monday as she detailed the difficult challenges to go through. And then Starmer's similarly kind of, you know, the language was there, but he's not a naturally charismatic person. Lots of concerns in Scottish Labour about doom and gloom. We'll come on to that in a little bit better. But do you think there's a disjoint between Scottish and UK Labour?
No, absolutely. The conference was in England, obviously. The conference had a very English feel to it. I've got the back of the programme here with an ad on the back, 14 years of hurt, never stopped us dreaming. The sort of, it did feel very English, right to the point that Scottish Labour's main fringe event on the Sunday was in a tent hosted by Labour Friends of Scotland. Now, what's that say about the party that is having to host an event in a Labour Friends of Scotland tent? I mean, it's all meant to be one big party, right?
Yeah.
Very strange. I mean, even some Labour folk were saying to us behind the scenes, we were like, they say, yeah, we know this looks a bit weird. You know, it's like having Labour Friends of Transnistria or something. It's just a bit strange and feels like a bit of a relic, and they know that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that sort of organisation drifting away, the idea of the sort of separate parts of the party. I don't think eyes are on Scotland now. I mean, in Scotland, we saw in the run-up to the election this big thing about the path to power runs through Scotland, and Starmer was up here lots. But I think attention has drifted now, and Scottish Labour are trying to turn it back and sort of saying, hey guys, remember us? We're going to need your help, and we're going to need it sooner than you think with the run-up to 2026. And
no better kind of example of that than the fact that in Sir Keir Starmer's 56-minute long speech, there were only 2 mentions of Scotland in the whole thing. There was one going, woohoo, we won, one single line at the start, and then an announcement that was hardly big and was hardly an announcement.
GB Energy being in Aberdeen, I mean, it's been the worst kept secret in politics since they said GB Energy's HQ is going to be in Scotland. I mean, where else is it going to be, as Starmer actually said in his speech? Like, everybody knew from then it was going to be in Aberdeen.
Everybody knew when they announced the policy.
And then, quite. And then the other week, everybody reported it was going to be Aberdeen because it was leaked. And then, you know, Starmer's big announcement in his speech was, it's going to be in Aberdeen. It's like, oh, great. Yeah, we already knew that. Everybody's been saying it. And but more importantly, what is GB Energy? And this is one of me and Conor's pet kind of rants, because we're really boring and we sit and rant about these kind of things. We still don't know. It's such a nebulous kind of concept still at the moment. Like, they've appointed a chair and stuff, but and they've said where the HQ is going to be, and they said there's going to be hopefully satellite offices in Glasgow and Edinburgh, you know, checking off all those boxes. But what it actually does, well, I mean, it looks to be sort of doling out grants and loans to companies to build wind farms. Presumably they'll have to stick a little GB Energy badge on any, windmill that goes up. But beyond that, we're not really sure. It keeps. Anas Sarwar described it in his speech as an energy generation company. I think, like, hold on, is it really? I suppose you could argue it is, in that it gives money to things that generate energy, but we're not talking a power station with loads of wind farms poking out of it and solar panels or anything like that.
It's not EDF, it's not E.ON, it's not any of these big places where you see nuclear power and all of that. That's not what GB Energy is at all.
It's not going to appear on price comparison sites. It's not going to supply energy. So it's still nebulous, and we still don't know like how many jobs it's going to bring, and I think we don't know that, and they've not even put a ballpark figure on it because it's going to be very small.
So running out of time, so let's briefly touch on what we talked about earlier, which was gloomy outlook and that potentially hurting Scottish Labour, and also the winter fuel payment cut and how that's impacting Scottish Labour as well. We had obviously the Unite Union motion yesterday, which embarrassed the senior leadership of UK Labour, calling for a reversal of that cut, which is a move from universal benefit to means tested. And we also had a poll in the paper today, which shows that Scottish Labour's kind of positive outlook, the idea that they can change Scotland for the better, that's losing traction with the Scottish public. It's obviously, I think Emily Gray from Ipsos, who did the poll, says it's grim reading for the SNP. More half the Scots think that they're doing a bad job. But Labour have slipped in the minds of voters as well, dropping in the numbers when it comes to whether or not they can improve, if they believe that Labour could improve the NHS, education, living standards and the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really, really worrying news for Scottish Labour. Like, in the last 6 months, the amount of people who think that Scottish Labour would do a better job than the SNP in key areas such as improving the NHS, improving education, improving living standards, and managing Scotland's economy has fallen. It was around a third, and it's fallen to sort of early 20% for all of that. So that's less than Scottish Labour's vote share at the general election. That's not a lot of people who've got a lot of confidence that Scottish Labour can actually do things better if they take over at Holyrood. And what's worse about this is it comes against the backdrop of ratings for the SNP's performance in government being terribly low. Like, more than half of people in Scotland think the SNP government are doing a bad job in key areas. Yet, Labour can only muster about 20% who think they can do better. And this has fallen. And this is where it's linked into the winter fuel thing. The living standards one in particular, can Labour do a better job on living standards, has fallen significantly in recent months. Now, you've got to think that whole winter fuel payment row has got something to do with that. So, worrying times for Scottish Labour when it should be, all about open, pushing forward and celebration, really.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we've got time for this week on CMQs. Another big conference coming up this weekend, which is the Conservative Party down in Birmingham. Our colleague Lewis Mackenzie's heading down for that. We'll also know the new Scottish Conservative leader tomorrow, which is Friday. Russell Finlay, Murdo Fraser, Megan Gallagher. We'll see where that one goes. But thank you, Chris, and thank you very much home for watching as well.